A very good evening, students. I'm Mrs. Anamika Bhau, your English teacher. Welcome you all to the online English classes. So, students, the topic for this week is our chapter Births by A.J.Cronin from our book Hornbill. So, this is the last chapter we are going to study as all the chapters has been completed. So, this is the last chapter Birth by A.J.Cronin. So let's move towards it. First of all, we will have a little introduction about the author A.J. Cronin, whose full name is Archibald Joseph Cronin, who was born on July 19, 1896 in Scotland and died on January 6, 1981 in Switzerland. He was a Scottish novelist and physician whose work has combined realism and social criticism. He was also one of the renowned storytellers of the 20th century. His best known works are The Citadel and The Keys of Kingdom, both of which were made into Oscar nominated films afterwards. He also created the Dr. Finlay character, who was the hero of a series of stories that served as the basis for long running BBC television and radio series entitled Dr. Finlay's Casebook. So that was a very famous series. I hope you must have seen that series, Dr. Finlay's Casebook. So this is all about A.J. Cronin. Let's move towards the chapter Birth. Actually, the Birth is not a complete book. This is just an excerpt from the famous work by A.J. Cronin, Citadel, and it revolves around the main character Andrew Manson. So Andrew Manson was the main character in the story, and besides that, Joe Morgan and Susan Morgan was there, who were husband and wife. So three main characters are there in the story, and the main character is Andrew Manson, who's just graduated out of medical school. So birth is an account of how the newly graduated medical practitioner helped in bringing Joe and Susan's child into this world, despite going through a tough time with his girlfriend, Christine. So when the chapter started, it was nearly midnight, and afterwards, the lesson begins with begins with Andrew Manson walking towards his home after having an unpleasant time with his girlfriend Kristen. Upon reaching home at around midnight, he finds Joe Morgan outside his house waiting for him. Actually, Joe and Susan Morgan was expecting a child after 20 years of their marriage, and Susan Morgan needed medical help immediately at that time. And upon reaching, Joe tells Andrew that he's too anxious to be going inside. So Andrew walks inside the house alone, and when he realizes that there is some time left, still some time left. So Susan's mother, who is wise but tense at the moment, she was beside the patient at that time. At that time, when Andrew went inside the house, Susan Morgan's mother and the nurse stood beside the patient. And when Andrew Manson realizes that there is still some time left for the delivery of the child, so Susan's mother, in between, whose wife but tense at that moment, offers him some tea. While he's sipping tea, he begins thinking about his girlfriend, with whom he had a very unpleasant time, and he recalls how his friends too are having a hard time in their relationship. On the other hand, he feels that marriage is meant to be something peaceful and cheerful. Thus, he finds himself in a conflict. But at that time, Susan's mother tells him how worried Susan is for the child because the situation is complicated at that time. And uh, after having the tea, Andrew started with the procedure of delivery, and afterwards, uh, after performing the procedure, the child is born but is lifeless. So Andrew Manson was confused between addressing the child or the mom, who herself laid unconscious at that moment. And afterwards, Andrew chooses to look after Susan first, and he injected her with a few medicines, And when he realized, first of all, he gave the child to the nurse and turned his attention towards Susan Morgan. And after injecting her with the few medicines, when he realized that her heart was regaining its strength, he turned towards the child, and afterwards it was a boy in perfect shape. He suddenly remembered that it was a case of restricted oxygen supply, and thus he instructed the nurse to get hot and cold water. And afterwards, when the doctor injected the medicine and after some frantic efforts left Susan Morgan out of danger, then after he asked for the child. The nurse felt no pulse, so she kept the baby amidst old newspapers. But afterwards, he was pulled out of the newspapers, and Andrew Manson saw that he was a boy perfectly formed, and his body was white and soft. The child was suffering from asphyxia, actually, the lack of oxygen in blood. So Andrew ordered for hot and cold water and two basins, and went on plunging the child now in icy cold water, then into the steaming hot water. So he started with the efforts, and 15 minutes passed, but nothing better happened. A sense of defeat pressed on Andrew at that time. So, after all his efforts, the child still lay lifeless. All others had already lose hope, but he went on rubbing the child with a rough towel. He kept crushing and releasing the little chest with the both of his hands. And actually, when all the others had already lost hope, while he continued with the procedures, and afterwards a miracle took place and the child gave a short heave. He was gasping now deeper and deeper. His skin turned pink, and then the child started crying. And afterwards, the body of the child was no longer still, leaving everyone surprised. The nurse muttered words of prayer while holding the child. The grandmother was also praying while Susan still laid unconscious. And afterwards, Andrew gave the child to the nurse and came out of the room. And outside stood Joe. He was highly relieved both the mother and the child were safe and sound. And Andrew was very exhausted at that time. And exhausted, Andrew left while informing Joe that all is well. And while he was walking home at around 5 in the morning, his heart was full at having accomplished something real in his life. So he was successful in his first operation after completing his medical degree, and he was really feeling at having accomplished something very real in his life. So this is all about the chapter Birth, in which Andrew Manson was the main character. And uh, after completing the medical degree, he helped in bringing Joe and Susan's child into this world despite going through a very tough time with his girlfriend Christine. So, thank you so much, students.